And then like with air power came the need for weather. Well, what we do a specific kind of niche in the weather. We go forward with special force units and we do observation, limited data forecasting, that sort of thing. And that's what I'm going to discuss. A couple things I'm going to talk about is the history, our training pipeline, our core competencies, what we do, and then last, I'll look ahead at where our career field is going. Before I can look ahead, history. Excuse me. Sorry, I had a cold. In Yugoslavia, in 1944, OSS recruited 27 weathermen, fit weathermen, and put them through some training, marksmanship. They went to parachute training in Palestine with the British parachuting course. Once they were trained, they were inserted into Yugoslavia, and they were in three-man teams. There was one forecaster, one observer, and a radio operator. And they were with Marshal Tito's partisans, which was fighting the Germans in Yugoslavia. And they put in probably about 3 or 4 teams, parachuted, and then one by water. And what's interesting is they were side by side with the partisans, broadcasting observations and weather data. And what this did is enabled the NATO forces to resupply the partisans. Well, that came to an end in August 1944 when the Germans were on to Marshal Tito. So basically they launched this huge offense against Marshal Tito and his partisans. And Marshal Tito unfortunately got out, and so did all of our airmen. And they were on the run for close to 3 weeks before they were finally airlifted back to friendly forces. And that's just it's one of the big things that we do. And when they were in Yugoslavia, they set up like a weather network. They taught the partisans how to observe weather and report it. Now the next story, Norm Day at Halden, the colonel already spoke about that. They put people behind enemy lines, parachuted in with the 101st and 82nd. And then pretty much once they were secure and stopped, not fighting anymore, is when they started reporting weather observations. In China and Burma, at the Burma Theater, OSS took these and recruited more airmen, trained them just like they did for Yugoslavia, and inserted them behind enemy lines. And what they did, they trained the Burmese guerrillas to report weather. They set up weather networks. And then they did the same thing again in the Pacific Theater. Any questions? It's pretty interesting. I mean, a lot of these guys, they were put forward with Army units. They taught locals, the Filipino guerrillas. They set up, like right there it says 39 weather stations that enabled operations to take off. Now, after World War II, they disbanded, most of those special weather units. But when Vietnam kicked off, in 1965, Captain Keith Grimes formed Detachment 75 of the 2nd Weather at Herberfield. What he created were 2 to 3 man teams. They were known as Jungle Gym Elements, and basically they would work with special forces in Laos, Vietnam, Cambodia. And what they would do is, like I said before, they would set up weather networks, weather stations for resupply and combat missions. In Laos, alone there, 1965 to 73, they set up their weather network. They trained Laotians and Air America assets. And by the end of Laos, at the height, they had 10 Air America weather stations and 18 Laotian sites that were putting out 4,500 weather observations per month. And then when this kicked off, they also went into Cambodia, where they sent in order to support the Cambodian government from Khmer Rouge. But unfortunately, by the end of 1975, they had three weather stations set up, and resupply did immediately improve. But Khmer Rouge overran the Cambodian government, and the Cambodian government surrendered. So one of the last people out were the actual weathermen that were at the airport after the withdrawal. Now, after the Vietnam War, they were disbanded again. And then in 1996, they reinstituted the 10th Combat Weather Squadron, which was originally Detachment 75 of the 2nd Air Force down in Herberfield. So we were reborn. And then through time from 1996 to present, we were always just we were a shred out of regular weather. And then we got our own Air Force Specialty Code. We're our own entity now. So we're Special Forces. And with that, we have our own training pipeline. Now, one thing, we do go through the same weather school that the Senior Master Sergeant talked about earlier. We go through the same exact weather school as every other Air Force weatherman. But we have a little bit of a difference. First, they have to go through a Special Operations Selection course, which is 2 weeks. And then from there, we do our weather school. And it's the same exact school, except Special Operations Weather have to wake up at pretty much 4 or 5 o'clock in the morning, get PT'd, smoked. I mean, this is like really tough SEAL type PT. Go to school, and then after school, they get PT'd again. And on top of that, they have to keep up their grades. So once they make it through all that, then they'll go to Army Airborne for static line. Then they go through combat survival. They go through water survival training, water egress training. Does everybody know what egress training is? It's a, excuse me. It's a big dunker. It's this big boxy looking thing, and they configure it to different helicopters, and then they drop it and spin it into a pool. And then you have to get out of it. So it's pretty fun. I actually, my prior career field, I was a SEER specialist, which is a survival instructor, and I did the water egress trainer. So I got to sit there and watch people, watch the students, because I would be in there as a safety, and I would watch the students, and it's just funny because a lot of times they're buckled in, and they get it submerges, spins, and then they freak out. Their eyeballs get really big. They're like all over the place. Sometimes you had to hold them down and unbuckle them and throw them out the back, but that was pretty fun. Anyway, after that, they do all this training, and then they get into the Special Operations Weather Apprentice course, which is another. I would equate this to SEALs BUDS training. It's 13 weeks, and we marry up with combat controllers, which is our other AFSC in the unit, our other counterparts. They're the guys with the red berets. So they marry up with them at that school, and it's pretty much, they're taking all their weather training, they're taking everything, and they're doing real missions. They teach them they parachute into airfields, they ride motorbikes, they march all over the place, they PT, they have water confidence. It's a good time. Not really, but very hard. And one of the things that I failed to mention, this whole pipeline is like 2.5 years of training before you're fully qualified. And then on top of that, the attrition rate is higher than SEALs. It's like 85% attrition rate. So, and one of the things that I failed to mention earlier, as a SAL-T, there are less than 100 of us in the Air Force. So we're a pretty special niche. I like to think so. So then after you graduate from that school, you go to the Special Tactics Operational Readiness Training, where they've finally stopped, they still haze you a bit, but it's more of mission specific. I mean, you do full mission profiles where you're jumping out of planes with seizing airfields, doing weather. We go forward and do weather missions, riverine analysis, that sort of thing in a mission set. And they're honing you're honing your skills, because it's like on-the-job training. In the Air Force we have like levels, and this gets you from 3 to 5. And then once you graduate from this, you're pretty much combat ready. I mean, you could deploy. But some go to additional training. Some of the additional training that we've got